It's really incredible to me how some economists can now look at China a little bit disappointingly, saying that China is really not consuming enough to pull the global economy out of its slump. It's such a short-sighted thing to say about China because first of all, China was the engine behind the growth that we have experienced, because they were the ones that were able and willing to produce massive amounts of goods for the US consumer. And if they hadn't believed the lies that they heard from the Central Bank of the US, from the Federal Reserve, and if they hadn't accepted those dollars, for which they are likely to get nothing in return, and they hadn't worked for that very hard, then the US would not have any prosperity. So up to a point that worked, and then of course the banking system and the leveraging of course ran wild also. And that stopped this whole consumption binge, which was basically based on Chinese ability to manufacture and its willingness. I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. So it's very, well, almost insane in my mind to be now disappointed and say, well, China's really letting us down, they're not consuming enough. The whole consumption-based, let's say, estimation of economic power is complete nonsense and has been introduced in the US to hide the fact that the US was not manufacturing anymore, that it was really becoming a third world country with no manufacturing base, no skill base, etc., outsourcing everything to countries that want to grow in prosperity, that had something to that really appreciated the fact that they were doing better. And maybe that's one of the important factors, that once you reach a certain level of comfort in your society, it's very hard to motivate people to work hard enough and let's say focused enough to produce goods that are competitive in the market. Maybe that's the basis of it. But another one, I think, would be a very refreshing thing, and that is if people started looking at an economy in terms of its utility. So how useful is it to how many people? So let's say you state a baseline survivability requirements for a US citizen in terms of food, shelter and energy, and you just say that a company has a utility value in the economy if it produces a good or a service that assists an X number of citizens to survive, basically. And then of course you have base level survival, so you have the bakers and the farmers making the food and the builders that make the houses. You need that stuff. And then you have the luxury items which go on top of that. And then if you look at a country, you can say, okay, it has such and such, let's say, a maintenance base or a sustainability base. It can sustain such and such number of people. And according to some articles I read recently, is that like the supportive power of the US economy in terms of how many people's lives it can support with a decent luxury, a decent standard of living, is pretty disappointing. But I thought it was interesting. Maybe you think it's interesting too, and thanks for listening.